This session is about you. It's about what you face. It's about what you confront. It's about the existential threat to everything that you take for granted. It really is about climate. And for the next half hour, that's what we're going to discuss. Hello, everybody. Hi.
Oh.
Hi.
I'm just going to give you a little bit of background, though, because I think it's important that what we're doing, you understand what we're doing here is not raising gloom unnecessarily. Because what the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said at the beginning of Sharm el-Sheikh was the following: we're on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator, quoting AC/DC. We're in the fight of our lives and we are losing, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. In other words, there is an acute urgency. Therefore, the setting for what we're going to discuss for the next half hour is about the ability or not of Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27, to actually move in the right direction. I think it was a cop-out. I think much of what could have been achieved was not achieved. And this was confirmed by a couple of quotes I'm going to give you now. The EU's climate policy supremo, Frans Timmermans, said, "There is a yawning gap. What we have in front of us is not enough of a step forward for people and planet. Too many parties are not ready to make progress on the fight against the climate crisis." And John Kerry said that we've got to move at a speed which is 6 times, I repeat that, 6 times what needs to be done. Similarly, Alok Sharma, the outgoing head of COP26 in Glasgow for the British government, he tweeted, "Emissions peaking before 2025, as the science tells us is necessary, not in the text. Clear follow through on the phase down on coal, not in this text." In other words, there's every reason to be gloomy. We can talk about net zero, but an enormous amount needs to be achieved at very high speed, certainly by 2031, quite apart from 2050, 2060. So that's the setting and the background for those of you who weren't in Sharm el-Sheikh, because we're losing time. And it's not me saying that, I'm quoting those who are the experts. And as I said right at the beginning today, Johan Rockström and others like him, the scientists, are saying the science is dire, but actually things are moving even faster than we as scientists thought was possible. In other words, they're getting freaked by the fact that things are moving out of their control. So that's to make you feel comfortable. All of you to feel comfortable, but it is about the lifestyle choices we've got to make. And that's why what we want to talk about in the next 25 minutes is about confronting the climate realities. And you can define them in whichever way you want. And you can see who we have: Camilla Dewoon, who's Head of Communications and Sustainability for Scania. Welcome. Antony Froggatt, I can just about see you, Antony. Senior Research Fellow and Deputy Director for the Environment and Society Programme at Chatham House. And we were involved in doing something at the Swedish Embassy about a month ago. And Greg Lucas, Sustainability Manager for Ikea. Now, all three of you, we haven't managed to talk in the corner over there, but that is what I've given the context. There's almost worse to describe, but what I'd like each of you to do is give a summary of where you think things are. Antony, from your point of view, because you had a lot of expertise, some of it in Sharm el-Sheikh. There is an agreement on loss and damage, and that finally being paid, but it's still not decided how it's going to be paid or where the money comes from. But your overall audit, quickly if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think you give a very clear summary of the majority of people's views in terms of the outcome of COP27. It was headlined as an implementation COP. The idea was to go from Glasgow. Many pledges were made, many opportunities were created, and then show how within the following 12 months we can make progress. And I think in some areas that occurred. You mentioned loss and damage. This was is an important statement, it's an important development, whereby creating a fund that will enable countries that are most affected by climate change to be recompensed, to have the ability to address some of the damage that is being caused, is necessary from a human perspective, from an environmental perspective, but also from a political perspective, that developing countries see that they are really being assisted. So I think that was the bright outcome. On implementation, as I said, it was trailed as an implementation COP. There was a real opportunity for countries to do that. In Glasgow, they said, we want countries to come forward in the next 12 months to increase their 2030 carbon reduction plans. And we only had 28 countries doing that. To its credit, the EU was one of those. So it pledged to increase from 55% reductions to 57% reductions. Australia increased its pledge. And interesting, it was mentioned before how things can change in terms of the Brazil and Lula turning up at COP. We had a change in government in Australia, which meant that they took up this baton. It was part of their election pledges. So absolutely, that's important. But it doesn't reflect, as you said, there was language that wasn't put in place, that could have been put in place in terms of the phase down of fossil fuels. There wasn't language about moving further and faster in terms of emissions reductions, despite the fact that we are seeing the technologies to deliver the change becoming cheaper and cheaper and more available. And I think that's the thing that I find most disappointing. It's not like the tools don't exist. And in actual fact, one of if there is a bright outcome of the war in Ukraine, it has showed that renewable energies and energy efficiencies actually are even cheaper. To give one final example is the cost of offshore wind now at one point was 6 times cheaper than the cost of using gas. So if this isn't a driver for us to accelerate the energy transition, then I do think things are very gloomy indeed.
Camilla, your audit.
Yes, no, going back to where you started, I mean, we need to have a foot on the accelerator, but we have to use the steering wheel also to, move us in the right direction. And talking about COP27, many hesitations were there. Should we participate or not? Will we get where we want? And we believe from Scania that absolutely, because we need to be together in the ecosystem when we have this large system change and really need to turn the steering wheel. What we do there is, of course, going back to, we talked about maybe greenwashing with missions and so on, but the purpose is really for us to drive the change towards a sustainable transport system. And what we want to do there is really to show that, as you said here, Antony, we are ready. We have taken, let's say we have started to turn the wheel a bit towards the electrified vehicles. And we are ready with the urban vehicles. We are launching now the regional heavy trucks, and we are coming 2024 with the long haulage. And thereby we see that we will be able to have 50% of our sales being electrified in 2025 already in Europe. And therefore I think that we would like to really highlight that the industry is ready, but that's not enough, because we need a full ecosystem. Also seeing Susanna here from Northvolt investing, we are investing also in Northvolt and have a great cooperation in order to move everything forward. And you being also a customer's customer, how can we set the system to work? What is lacking, I see now, for really turning faster is infrastructure on electrification for the charging, but also the grid. So that's a big challenge for us.
And one of the things that came through, certainly from the chair of the IPCC, is it requires governments to regulate.
Yes.
It requires governments to take an upper hand. Even if there's technology, even if there's an awful lot of money, that doesn't mean to say it's going to go in the right direction at the speed that's necessary. I think there's agreement among the three of you. Greg, your view, the readout from Ikea.
So there's 3 key challenges which are really converging. I think if we did a quick workshop on the challenges facing society, we could quite easily come up with hundreds, maybe even thousands. But the 3 key challenges are obviously climate change, inequality, and unsustainable consumption. And I think, as you mentioned on the significant process around progress around loss and damage, that is something to celebrate from COP27. However, it's clear that we're off target from the 1.5 degrees and that wasn't achieved, and that there is work to be done, particularly when it comes to the nationally determined contributions. However, there is still success, and there are areas to celebrate and remain optimistic around. Those small steps that we see from the many people in our everyday, we see more and more around this. From an Ikea perspective, we know that climate change is a commercial issue. It's something that affects every single one of us. It affects the entirety of our value chain. So working with the many people to enable and inspire a more healthy and sustainable life at home is absolutely central and needs to happen in parallel to that international action and national or city-based action as well. And we've seen real progress. We have the mandate from our customers and co-workers to accelerate. From our perspective, we're not going fast enough. We're updating our people and planet positive strategy right now to strengthen those commitments and to move faster across those 3 key challenges and potentially others that will be coming between now and 2030 as well.
I'd like to invite anyone to come in as well in the next 20 minutes. You can be part of this conversation. Could be you have much better ideas than I'm bringing to the table. I should tell you there were voices of relative optimism. This from Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland. She's now chair of the elders, but she is indefatigable about this, particularly the impact on her grandchildren. I wouldn't call it a disaster, but what we saw is more coalitions for clean energy. In other words, there was a lot going on. So please come in, get the microphone and put your hand up and so on. I'd like you to be part of this. But Antony, I'd like to come back to all 3 of you as well, but Antony, can you lead on this? There were those who described what happened there as a fossil fuel trade fair, because a lot of the fossil fuel industry were represented, especially Saudi Arabia. In other words, there's now a fear that the whole COP process, moving on to the Emirates next year, to Dubai, is now becoming corrupted by the black stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of numbers, it's clear that there was more fossil fuel company representatives at COP27 than there were at COP26. I think the estimate was 25% more. It's clear that some delegations, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, were very large and have very clear interests in, from a financial perspective, maintaining their sales of fossil fuels. And it is if you look at the timetables that we're talking about, in order to meet the 1.5 degree targets, we need to have over and above, in some cases, quite ambitious plans for reducing emissions to 2030, a further 40% reduction. I mean, it is huge in terms of what that means, given the fact that more than 60% of emissions come from the burning of fossil fuels. So we are undoubtedly going to affect the profits of fossil fuel companies and those countries that are dependent on fossil fuels. So we've known that. I mean, that's not a change. And I think in particular, referring back to my previous point, as the economies of the alternatives become more and more apparent, and you don't necessarily invest in renewables now purely for environmental reasons, you're investing in it for economic reasons, then we expect this to accelerate. So their short-term outlooks, what they thought was going to happen maybe 20, 30 years from now, maybe in the next generation, is now confronting them. So there will be a battle, and it will be a battle between those people that want to accelerate, that want to reduce the use of fossil fuels, and those that see it from an economic perspective as being their future. And
I'd suggest it's going to sharpen. Does anyone want to come in? You know, the time is yours. I'll come to you. Anyone else want to come in? Please, let's get the microphone here for the moment. But what about the transport business? Given the kind of clients, customers you sell to, or you rent to, or you lease to, what are you seeing in terms of the shift that is now going on in demand? In other words, when you talk about 2 years from now, one of your deadlines, and it has to be met, is that what your customers now want as part of the transition?
We see from the heavy industry that in just a couple of years, in 2-3 years, the total operating economy will be in favor for the new technology. So, I mean, this goes faster than we have believed. But still,
faster than you believe?
Yes, before. So, I mean, now it's really going fast. And I would like to highlight that this transition can only be happening if we have infrastructure and grid enough to supply this good economy, because the solutions are there. We have fantastic green batteries coming out, and the prices of them are actually falling. So the economy is actually now improving day by day for these investments.
And Nick, just from a customer perspective and from an Ikea perspective, we committed by 2025 that all home deliveries will be undertaken by 100% electric vehicles. That's not just about the vehicles or the charging infrastructure, it's also about investing in the drivers as well. It's about investing sometimes in an industry and looking kind of more broadly where the average age of drivers can be relatively high. How do you bring in new talent into that as well? So it's taking that systems-based approach that we take to almost all aspects of climate change, of the just transition to net zero, to unsustainable consumption, to a specific example here, and working together and collaborating around that.
And just to show the commitment, sorry, we're going to let you in, but we also in the ecosystem, we even now partner up with our fiercest competitors, Volvo and Daimler, in order to build infrastructure. So we have invested, all of us, in order to build 1,700 infrastructure charging stations in Europe, just to show that we are committed. And this is not our core business, but just to show the way.
What I'm trying to get to is the public is in the developed world is showing deep anxiety, but is showing frustration with governments to do it. But what kind of customer pressure? You've already talked about greater demand than even you expected. Therefore, what kind of curve do you see ahead of increased demand, increasing expectation, ever shorter? And I'll come on to you, Greg, to talk about your green spots in your stores. What you're seeing in terms of the consumer trends and consumer expectations.
So we already have the very first ones and first movers like Ikea and others, but now we also see the early adopters. And I foresee that like in any other industry and change of technology, when we soon have 20% with us, the rest will follow. And that is what we're seeing now, that still we're waiting for the really, let's say, green roads and the heaviest vehicles in order to get there, but that we do in 1 year. So then I foresee that this will be exponential. So really the demand is there, the economy is there, the customers are with us, and we are waiting for the system to be completed.
Greg, you showed me around your Greenwich store, which is particularly focused on all of this. And we talked at length about that. It was one of the hottest days of the year. But what is your 6 months on, where are you seeing the evidence? What is the evidence showing about the willingness of customers to change their habits, to change their mindset, to do what is necessary, even if governments are not yet telling them what to do?
And we've certainly seen an opportunity in a real time of crisis, and many people are looking for solutions. They're not looking for solutions necessarily to climate change or to the massive problems that we're posing here today, but they're looking for solutions around energy efficiency, minimizing waste, food waste, growing their own, prolonging the life of products. And what we've seen through our partners such as Middlesex University and the University of Surrey is through our Live Largom behaviour change programme. And when you walk into one of our stores, whether it's Greenwich, whether it's Wembley, it's those customers that greet you who have been through that behaviour change programme. They've undertaken workshops within their communities and they've taken the learnings from that. Some have brought that within their communities as well and taken it further. Some have gone on to the international level. A primary school teacher from Wembley taking what she's learnt over to the United Nations in Switzerland, and others taking it through their friends and family. But our partners have demonstrated over a 5-year period that those behaviour changes aren't just staying the same. They're not just keeping those healthy and sustainable behaviour changes, but they're growing. They're growing within their households and within their communities.
How do you get that to volume, though?
And we co-create with our customers. So our main communication message, whether it's online, whether it's in store, are those customers, are those faces, are those real life people who face the same challenges and who grow and learn with us around these areas. We don't have all of those solutions. So we've developed a community of our customers to be able to tell us what those solutions are, whether it's around areas linked to life at home, where our expertise is, or whether it's going further as well. And that really drives not just our communication strategy, but it's why we need to continually update and why we're going through this massive update at the moment of our People and Planet Positive strategy with a range of stakeholders that we talked about around collaboration, but taking the bold action to really listen and collaborate and co-create with the many people and our many customers as well.
Let's get a couple of comments, please, and here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. A couple of years ago, I spoke to a professor, Japanese professor of environmental technology in Singapore, and I asked him, "So what's the future? What's the source of future energy?" And he said coal. I was quite shocked. So the question is,
How long ago was
what
that?
happens with the technology development to use fossil fuels for the future? Can you develop it so it can be used in a good way?
Antony, keep that for the moment. Let's get the second question.
Yeah, it's more a comment actually. I'm not a politician. I produce records and movies, and I live.
And your name is?
My name is Göran Andersson. I live in Sao Paulo, New York, and London. I was born in Sweden.
Thanks for dropping in today.
And I didn't know what to expect, but this is fabulous. So I could talk about Brazil a whole bit. Good thing we have a new president coming in, who's actually acting president without being his president invading. Anyway, so what we decided to do in my line of work was I was involved in starting something called Project Everyone in 2014 with a friend of mine here, Richard Curtis, that you may know. And actually that thing you have on your jacket is one of our designs. So we decided to become, as Richard said, we'll make the global goals famous. And we've been somewhat successful. We raised money to do it. We all work for free. This is not our profession. Then earlier this year, after now been living here for a while, we decided to do something in the music space. We call it Earth Percent. We are not that well known yet, but the concept is simple, and I think it could be applied across all industries. So we are now telling our songwriters to actually, you might not know this, but a lot of songs, they have more than one person who composed the music. So we said, okay, why don't you make the planet a co-writer and give 1%? It took a while to get then the industry to, wait a minute, how do we do this? So now we actually have what's called a performing rights organization based in Spain that is, brave enough to then basically...
You're talking about communicating our predicament, are you?
Well, it's actually, I think sorry for, I have a bad tendency of just rambling on. We think we can do two things. We can raise probably $200 million a year by having these songwriters giving 1% of their earnings to, and we're not going to spend the money. We're now identifying charities where the money should go, because that's not what we know how to do. But also getting these people involved. I think the power of entertainers, with a good cause, and there's plenty of them, sometimes maybe lost causes, could also, we then hope to accomplish two things: get money in and also spread, the word that this is a
huge issue underpinning everything, the communication of what needs to be done.
So
can I pause you there, because otherwise we're going to run out of time.
So just let me finish.
Okay.
So I think this idea could be used in other industries. That's
okay, thank you. All right, we'll pick up, can you, Antony, first of all, pick up on the coal, particularly what you're now beginning to see in India and China?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't underestimate the challenge that's facing us in terms of the energy sector. When you have nearly 90% of energy that is used, commercially used around the world, coming from fossil fuels. So transforming away from that is very difficult. But again, I'd come back to if you go back to the Paris in 2015 when the Paris Agreement was signed, the basic overarching narrative was, well, we need to transform the energy sector, and that will be probably a mixture of nuclear, a mixture of fossil fuel with CCS and renewables, and it will vary across the board in that. If you look at it now, people are basically saying, well, we need to transform. Most of this will come from renewables. And if you look at the International Energy Agency, in terms of their forecasts, they're saying sort of 80% now is going to be coming from renewables. So that shift has occurred. So there may be one or two cases where you have nuclear or fossil fuels, but I think the overall economic direction moves towards renewables. And I think it is important to understand that, because the system has to change. If you have coal with CCS, you can tend to have the same sort of system. If you're having renewables dominating it, then you need to have more flexibility, you need to have more interconnection, you need to have more storage. So you need to change the way the system operates. And I think that is probably the biggest challenge that we're facing. It's not the cost of generating electricity from low carbon sources.
We should say CCS is carbon capture and storage. Greg, you want to come in?
Yeah, and it's a really, really great discussion to have. We've talked a lot about the negative impacts of climate change to the extent that many people turn off around it. To start talking about what does that future, the actions that we take today, those urgent actions that I'm sure you've heard a lot about today and almost in your everyday, but to paint a picture of the future that we can develop is often an area that's missing. And I think to kind of combine both of the questions together, and I'd love to see the evidence for coal being the future. Certainly from an Ikea perspective, we already use 100% renewable electricity across the UK and Ireland. We invest in our partners in China and India and other countries around the world to develop that infrastructure for renewable electricity. The challenge we have at the moment that we're trying to accelerate is how to transition away from gas. Your point about what do you do with products, what do you do with boilers at the end of their life? This is where, like many different areas, climate change and the circular economy, and we haven't heard enough around the circular economy and the impact that resources and materials can have, particularly at COP27, but can sometimes collide. We want to accelerate away from gas, but we have assets that still work, whether they're solar panels, whether they're boilers, whatever areas it is that we're looking at. And it's a really, really key area. How do you prolong the life of it, but still transition away? And that's one of the conundrums that we're working on.
Let me give you, all three of you, a challenge, picking up on what I think is what you're saying about communication. How do you communicate with a public which increasingly is deeply concerned but frustrated? What is the Scania view of how this can be done? Presumably through truck sales, but on the other hand, it's a broader community responsibility.
No, that's a great question, and also I would like to connect that maybe to the previous discussion also on gas. There is also good gas talking about Brazil. We have a great operation in Brazil where biogas is actually the solution for the short term, which can reduce the emissions by 90%. So I think that we should not get stuck with it has to be electrification. And talking to communications, we have solutions that actually doesn't require a complete system change when it comes to vehicles. So I think that also there are good, let's say, there are good examples of that also in the UK, where Nottingham, for example, have buses running on biogas. And there is a circularity in that also from the waste actually using this for fuel. So I think that the understanding and the pushing the system, that looking for the options that are there, that is what we as consumer can choose. And that change, we can, from an industry point of view, show that there is options already and try to push them. And also, I would say that also comes to public procurement. Push the public procurement to actually direct us towards having demands on what is going to be driven for refuse collectors, for example, what is going to be driven for infrastructure projects and so on when it comes to our industry. So I think that we have a big task to show that there are opportunities in this difficulty and we can all take options.
Greg, just before you give that response, let's hear from this voice in the front.
Yes, I'm Maria, I'm from Alfa Laval, and we're basically a company full of energy hunters. So I guess something that I'm a little bit missing here, perhaps also you're saying circularity, that is a good opportunity, but the wasted energy, there's probably enough energy produced today if we could have used it more efficiently or be able to reuse it. And it's a lot on the industry because that's a big user. But I think we can all do our part there.
What is an energy hunter?
It's somebody who's actually looking into where do we have the waste streams of energy that just goes out into smoke pretty much, or in any kind of process. There is usually an energy that is a byproduct, and that can be reused. When you need cooling, you have heating as a result. When you need heating, you have cooling as a result. So connecting the systems, connecting the dots.
Okay. Greg, again, picking up.
On the communication point,
Yeah.
it's absolutely key. It is the one really key challenge we're facing, particularly when looking at the circular economy or aspects of climate action.
Is it being confronted energetically enough?
It is. Have we found the right collaborations, and have we really started thinking out of the box and utilizing outer thinking? There's a lot more that can be done, whether it's with artists, whether it's with musicians, whether it's in terms of painting a picture of the future, and a whole host of other areas. When we're looking at business cases around closing the loop of a product, we focus on materials, we bring in the specialists around it, we focus on the service and what might happen in the store. But how do we paint that bigger picture? How do we really bring the many behind and create this movement? Communication is still the one piece of the jigsaw, I would say, that's potentially missing around this. And there's still a lot of work and a lot of collaboration.
And a lot of imagination needed.
Indeed.
Final thought, Antony. I mean, this is a process which happens every year, the COP process, but so much is going on elsewhere. What is your view about whether this is stalling as a process, or whether it can produce the momentum, the energy, the drive, the speed, the urgency which is necessary as dictated by these very gloomy scientific reports?
The jury's out. I mean, in terms of what will happen as a result of the current situation. If I can come to the point about energy saving, as a very clear example, we have governments now in Europe are subsidizing energy bills to the tune of around €500 billion this year. €500 billion. Imagine what that could be done in terms of energy saving. And I think that's what, given the fact that we know the situation is probably likely to get worse next winter, that is the challenge for governments over the next 9 months to implement this. And I hope that they now seize the moment. The second thing just to say on energy efficiency is in the UK, it's estimated that energy consumption is down 10% over last year. And that's partly because of higher prices, but it's also because people talk about energy in the way that they didn't 2 years ago. 2 or 3 years ago, the average household talked about its energy bill around 5 minutes a year. Now it's now common parlance in terms of everyday life. What are you doing about energy? When have you turned on your heating, et cetera, et cetera? This is the thing that we can really capture. We're driven by energy security, by the horrors in Russia. We don't want to support Putin in terms of using more energy. But equally, we have climate change, which will be probably a greater impact in terms of the consequences for society. So hopefully, we can seize this opportunity.
We've given you a practical assessment in 30 minutes, climate change in 30 minutes. Thank you, all three of you, very much indeed. I'm loath to bring this to a close, but otherwise you'll start drifting away. So you can drift away now and have a climate comfortable coffee, orange juice or water